Why is it so hard for you to silence your mind? It has become common to spend entire nights trapped in the echo of arguments that ended days ago, or inventing chaotic scenarios around dilemmas that do not yet exist. It is that background murmur keeping you awake, forcing you to debate invisible opponents while the rest of the world sleeps calmly. You try to command yourself to stop, but the order fails because you do not know the root of that endless noise. Ancient Eastern wisdom identified this phenomenon with disarming precision. It did not call it anxiety or stress. It called it Shin saru, the monkey mind. It described our psychology as a restless primate leaping without pause between branches of thought, screaming through a forest of abstract concepts, even when absolute silence surrounds it. This inner creature is not trying to torture you. It is simply performing the only task it knows. All that frantic activity exhausting you at the end of the day is not a system failure. It is the system operating exactly as it learned to operate in the past, when our ancestors lived in hostile environments where danger could wait behind every bush. Insomnia and suspicion were essential survival tools. Analyzing past mistakes helped them avoid the same trap. Projecting future threats protected them from disaster. Distrusting silence kept the pulse alert. That is why you scroll through your phone looking for irrelevant messages late at night, or rehearse speeches in the mirror. Your biological inheritance is still trapped in the jungle. The real problem is that we no longer live under constant mortal danger, but your brain has not received the news. This inertia pulls us into constant conflict with our own nature. The human condition resembles trying to quench thirst with salt water, a repetitive effort that only increases the original desperation. We set ambitious goals believing that reaching them will finally bring rest, but success only reveals the immediate need to chase the next target. We satisfy urgent appetites hoping to extinguish the inner fire, and the only result is that those same desires return soon after, stronger than before. We search for an emergency exit towards a final satisfaction that never arrives, feeling trapped in an endless loop of chronic dissatisfaction. Then we try to break the cycle through severe control, imposing sentences of absolute stillness on a mechanism designed to stay in motion. The irony of this psychological labyrinth is that every conscious attempt to silence the noise often feeds the fire you wanted to extinguish. The mind turns the search for peace into another task, another command, another struggle. How can you expect mental peace if the very tool you use to find it is the one generating the conflict? Before peace appears, the monkey has to be seen, not beaten. Its movement must be understood as inherited momentum, not personal failure. Only then can attention stop fighting thought and begin watching it, patiently, until the noise reveals the silence it was hiding beneath. The Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi warned that the hardest thing to perceive is the very thing we are immersed in. A fish never questions the ocean while swimming through it, just as we rarely question the validity of the thoughts coloring our reality. The fundamental mistake begins when we try to use that same rational structure to silence the noise it creates. Trying to calm the mind through a mental decree is like trying to put out a fire by throwing dry wood onto the flames. Every thought that orders silence is still another thought, joining the crowd already living inside your head and swelling the original uproar. Beneath this perspective lies the labyrinth of the ego, that false sense of identity which experiences itself as separate and independent from the rest of the world. The silence you long for is already available. It is not a distant goal to conquer, but the basic reality revealed when daily illusions are dismantled. Here is the great contradiction. The separate self desperately wants intellectual peace, yet cannot experience it, because that stillness requires its own disappearance. Enslaved by its limits, the ego cannot create a real idea of what exists beyond logical thought. It behaves like a quarrelsome bully waiting anxiously outside a celebration to which no one invited him. The party is enjoyable precisely because that troublesome character is absent, and his exclusion is the direct cause of the shared well-being. You have felt this when trying to fall asleep by forcing your mind to go blank. That conscious demand only awakens an inner tension sharper than physical tiredness. The more you order stillness, the more you confirm the authority of the one giving orders. The mechanics of consciousness have boundaries we must urgently accept. The intellect cannot grasp itself, just as the edge of a sword cannot cut its own steel, and teeth cannot bite their own surface. The precise instant you actively chase deep calm, you push it further away. That desperate grasping after a higher state of understanding becomes the wall that blocks the direct experience of tranquility. The seeker becomes the obstacle. The effort to arrive keeps proving that you believe yourself absent from the place you already are. Even the assimilation of these paradoxes requires one final release. Otherwise, they become another heavy conceptual burden. Once you explore the gears of these logical dilemmas, the only viable path is to let them fall into forgetfulness. It is like studying the electronic circuits of a television in exact detail and, once the technical map is understood, sitting on the sofa simply to enjoy the film. The first task demands minor explanations and exhausting analysis. The second requires only clean attention, free of judgment. This does not mean knowledge is useless. It means knowledge has a limit. It can show you the door, but it cannot walk through it for you. Eventually, explanation must become silence, and method must become presence. If the mechanism generating the conflict lacks the tools to shut down its own factory of noise, then the solution must come from a dimension that does not depend on intellectual effort. It arises from awareness itself, from the silent space that notices thought without adding another argument to it. There, the monkey mind loses momentum because it is not mistaken for you. A young monk walked in frustration along the monastery paths after months of trying to force silence onto his thoughts during meditation. Desperate because every attempt seemed to fail, he approached the master and asked what he was doing wrong in his daily practice. The old man, instead of offering an intellectual explanation, handed him a wooden bowl filled with water to the very rim. He told him to cross the wide rock garden without spilling a single drop, warning that if he failed, he would have to leave the temple. The disciple began moving slowly, holding the vessel with both hands, entering a level of attention he had not touched in weeks of isolation. Every step required precision, and every movement of the body organized itself around the liquid surface. When he reached the other side with the bowl intact, the master asked what he had been thinking about during the walk. The young man sighed with relief and answered that he had thought only of the water. The sage smiled silently and nodded. This old parable reveals a psychological mechanism we usually ignore in daily life. The mind does not become quiet because it receives a direct order. It calms only when it finds something real enough to rest upon. It does not need an abstract concept or a supreme effort of will, but reality itself, appearing with texture, weight, and immediacy. Modern neuroscience would confirm centuries later, through the study of brain maps, what those monks already knew without advanced technology. Researchers observed that regions involved in internal chatter tend to deactivate when attention turns fully towards the outer world. It happens when you cook while noticing the scent of spices, when you feel the impact of hot water in the shower, or when you listen to a melody with complete surrender. In those ordinary moments, disturbing thoughts simply vanish, without anyone expelling them. The parable becomes practical the moment you follow the master's instruction. You can try it during your most turbulent moments, when your mind becomes chaos. The same mind that cannot stop when commanded stops by itself, when it finds something more real than its own thoughts. This does not happen because you have won the battle against noise, but because you have stopped fighting it. Combat strengthens ideas, while real presence dissolves them without struggle. Your task is not to kill the monkey, but to give awareness a bowl of water, a flame, a breath, a footstep, something simple enough to gather the scattered energy. In the Zen tradition, this understanding opens the door to satori, that instant of clarity in which the illusion of the separate self suddenly fades. Awakening is not built step by step through slow accumulation. It reveals itself at once when the conceptual clouds disperse together, allowing muddy water to recover its natural transparency. What has been seen through that window can never be entirely ignored again. Alan Watts explained that when existence drops the burden of the past and has no fixed direction towards the future, the resulting emptiness is immediately filled by the present. The space that habitual hurry reduces to a thin line expands until it becomes immense. This is the experience of Ichigo Ichi, often translated as one life, one encounter. The intimate recognition that every second is unique, unrepeatable, and will never be lived in the same way again. That state of absolute presence you have just touched has a specific name in Japanese philosophy, although its true meaning is far from what you might imagine. It is not a decorative phrase for appreciating beautiful moments. It is a discipline of meeting reality before the mind turns it into memory. Once you understand this, the bowl of water is no longer a parable. It becomes the instruction hidden inside every ordinary moment you inhabit now. That state of absolute presence that the disciple touched in the garden while carrying the bowl of water is called mushin in the Japanese tradition. The term combines two essential ideas: mu, which evokes absence or emptiness, and shin, which refers to both mind and heart, two dimensions that Eastern thought has never treated as separate. Far from being an unreachable mystical trance, mushin means the mind without mind, a state of clarity in which intelligence operates freely, without an inner watcher harassing every movement. Zhuangzi illustrated this subtle difference through an expert archer. When the man practices in his own courtyard with no external pressure, his mind is empty. He shoots with complete ease, and the arrow finds the center of the target because between his hands and the mark, there is no one making decisions. The problem begins when that same archer enters a tournament where a valuable prize of gold is at stake. Filled with a desire to win, obsessed with the future, and consumed by anxiety over failure, his technique breaks at once and the shot goes wide. The archer acting from emptiness flows with his surroundings, while the archer acting from the need to control sabotages his own gift. This paradox already belongs to your own experience, even if you have never given it this name. Think of a recent conversation that flowed so lightly that you forgot the words you were using, or of a creative instant when your hand moved across the page before the head had finished processing the idea. You were immersed in a physical activity or magnetic dialogue so completely that you lost all sense of time, and when ordinary routine returned, you could not explain the exact mechanism that had carried you there. In those moments, you were inhabiting mushin. Zen holds that this state is not a casual anomaly, but the original nature of mind before we built the harmful habit of watching ourselves endlessly. Dogen, the celebrated monk who deepened these teachings, wrote that studying the way of understanding means studying oneself, and that studying oneself means forgetting oneself. To find yourself, you must loosen the ropes. To know yourself truly, you must renounce constant surveillance over your own actions. The mind that watches itself without rest is not awake, it is trapped. Mushin is not the absence of consciousness, but the absence of the observer watching itself observing. Your old monkey mind hates this emptiness because you are its most precious project, its most urgent occupation, and the only reason it can justify its exhausting chatter. If this transparency is the factory setting of your psychology, the right question is not how to manufacture silence. It is what has been blocking it. The answer is not found by forcing the mind into obedience, but by seeing the one who keeps trying to control it. The moment control relaxes, action becomes clean. Speech comes when needed. Movement happens without strain. Thought serves instead of ruling. And in that effortless precision, the self-conscious noise that once claimed to be you begins to fade. What remains is not passivity, but intelligence without friction. Presence moving through life before the monkey can turn it into another problem. Mushin is simply awareness restored to its natural flow, and that is why it feels both ordinary and sacred at once in you now. Discovering what blocks that original flow forces us to examine a dimension forgotten by our obsession with accumulating knowledge and objects. If what prevents the natural movement of consciousness is inner saturation, then you need to understand what it truly means to empty the mind. Taoist sages pointed out that we usually pay attention only to visible physical forms, ignoring the space that surrounds them and lives within them. Emptiness is inseparable from things, and it determines their real usefulness in practical life. Lao Tzu illustrated this obvious truth by asking us to look at the 30 spokes joined at the hub of a wheel, remembering that it is the hollow center that allows the mechanism to turn and work. We shape clay to make a vessel, but it is the empty space inside that lets us fill it with water or food. When we build a house, we invest effort in materials, walls, doors, and windows. Yet the raw reality is that we live in the empty space left within those structures. Without emptiness, nothing could exist or move, because we need clean distance for objects to separate and preserve their function. This physical principle transfers directly to our mental ecology. Lao Tzu suggested abandoning strict intellectual learning in order to free ourselves from daily worries, a warning that does not promote ignorance, but caution before a mind saturated with fixed categories, rigid theories, and abstract interpretations. We cling stubbornly to static conceptual frameworks, while reality flows far more freely than our definitions, making the mistake of confusing mental maps with the actual territory beneath our feet. The mind that cannot stop analyzing is not more intelligent than the mind that knows how to be silent. It is simply a mind-confusing noise with thought, and thought with reality. When the intellect is crowded and closed around its own certainties, there is little room for true understanding to arise. Taoist thought proposes cultivating Shu, a receptive openness that clears consciousness of previous beliefs, so we can perceive what surrounds us without distorting filters. Zhuangzi compared this process to an uninhabited apartment flooded with natural light through clean windows. You have experienced it after spending hours in front of a screen, trying to solve a complex problem without success, until the right answer suddenly appeared during a morning walk or under the shower, precisely when you stopped pushing and the mind recovered its free space. Freeing that space requires dismantling another invisible prison, which Lie Tzu denounced with clarity. A mind obsessively occupied with the pursuit of fame, profit, and social status creates a constant source of suffering. To chase other people's applause is to work on your knees for an audience that changes by the hour, accepting an exhausting effort that breeds perpetual fear of losing the approval you have won. Whoever ties well-being to material gain chains stability to external circumstances beyond personal control. Li Tzu considered it wiser to empty the inner world of such attachments, so we do not live imprisoned by the judgment of others. He recognized that our achievements depend so much on external conditions that claiming full ownership of them is a form of self-deception. Your success is never yours alone. It is shaped by timing, health, chance, culture, family, education, and the invisible cooperation of countless people you will never meet. If emptiness is the quality that gives usefulness to things in the outer world, the masters developed a specific method for planting that same lightness in the depths of consciousness. It begins by creating space where the monkey mind expects more material to grasp. Instead of adding another theory, another possession, or another identity, you remove, you loosen, you let the room inside you become habitable again. Only then can silence stop being a goal and become your natural atmosphere. Ancient sages designed a precise method for planting that same lightness in the depths of consciousness. Zhuangzi called it Shin, an expression often translated as fasting of the heart. In Eastern thought of that period, heart and mind shared the same conceptual root, representing the unified center of feeling and reasoning. While contemporary life revolves around constant gain, more information, more experiences to consume, more money, more influence, fasting of the heart, proposes the opposite movement. It is the conscious practice of losing, releasing, and becoming lighter, until the weight on your shoulders begins to fall away, and nothing remains inside but clean emptiness. Notice, right now as you hear this sentence, that there is an invisible burden you can release immediately. Feel the specific texture of the tension gathered at the back of your neck, and notice how the simple act of recognizing it already begins to soften its rigidity. In Zhuangzi's text, Confucius illustrates this process by advising us not to listen with the ears, or even with the mind, but directly with the spirit. You can try this now. Let these words enter, not as material to be analyzed or labeled by the intellect, but through the silent space of the spirit, empty enough to receive sound without resistance. The natural order of reality gathers only in that emptiness. This practice goes beyond detachment from reputation or material success. It asks you to release rigid expectations, fixed beliefs, and even the sense of being a separate identity. When you empty yourself of old projections, you can see what is happening around you without the distortions created by desire. You respond to present circumstances with a spontaneity that does not feel reckless, because it comes from alignment rather than impulse. It is not passivity. It is action without the extra burden of the self constantly asking what it will gain. Lao Tzu offered a complementary way to manage inner noise by pointing to nature. Water never defeats rock by waging a frontal war against it. It does not attack violently or confront hardness on its own terms. Water flows around the surface, passes over it, slips underneath, and enters every small crack where the obstacle loses rigidity. Over centuries, the stone yields to wear, yet no one can point to the exact second when the change happened. Zen adapts this principle to the chatter of thought, rejecting internal wars, aggressive suppression, and forced control. Bring the first disturbing thought that appears in your mind into attention. Do not try to destroy it or push it away. Allow it to remain there, floating freely, and watch how, when you withdraw active resistance, the idea loses destructive force in real time, simply because you have stopped feeding it with the insistence on fighting it. You have known this relief in difficult moments, when you stopped resisting a deep worry, not because you found the final solution, but because you were too tired to keep fighting, and the anguish faded when you lowered the weapons. Contemporary psychology calls this shift cognitive diffusion, a fundamental pillar in modern acceptance-based therapies. The real obstacle that exhausts you is not the appearance of thought in your head, but your tendency to fuse with it, identifying so closely with what you imagine that you lose the capacity to distinguish between having a temporary idea and meeting reality itself. The gap between thought and reaction, explored by Western psychology and philosophy, is the same territory Shin cultivates from within. They are not separate roads, but the same path under different names. Verify now that there is a clean space in you registering the sound of this voice, and that the conscious presence listening is not any of the passing thoughts that crossed your mind moments ago. When this protective distance is established, you begin to contemplate thoughts as passing events occurring within awareness, not as commands from reality. Your relationship with yourself changes deeply. The goal is not to make troublesome ideas disappear forever, but to realize that awareness is far larger than they are. This journey through stillness, emptiness, and surrender now converges in a final question that Zen expressed through a riddle designed to break the machinery of rational thought before you try to answer. The mind wants a conclusion it can own, repeat, and display. Zen offers instead a door that only opens when the one seeking an answer becomes quiet. That is why the heart must fast. It empties itself of certainty, status, and resistance until the question is no longer solved by thought, but lived as immediate presence. In that presence, even confusion becomes spacious, and the monkey mind, finding no enemy to fight, begins to rest at last. From there, silence is not achieved. It is uncovered as the natural depth that was waiting beneath every effort all along within you. There is an old traditional riddle that presents a limit situation. If you are trapped inside a room being swallowed by flames, which object do you choose to save first? The answer offered by the tradition breaks ordinary logic by declaring that the question itself is the burning room. When your mind sinks into chaos, the most common mistake is trying to solve confusion from inside that same disorder. You search for the right answer by obsessively analyzing every variable without seeing that the original framing is the real problem. Like trying to rearrange furniture during a fire instead of walking through the exit. It happens when you try to solve an emotional crisis by adding more layers of analysis to the anguish of the moment, a strategy that only multiplies the weight of the first confusion. Stepping away from the blaze does not mean cowardly escape or denial of the fire. It means taking a step back wide enough to see the whole space instead of staying blind among the flames. These teachings are not trying to show you a way to think better. They train you to detect the precise instant when you are burning inside. Some people spend decades looking for exits from complex dilemmas that never needed an answer. They only needed distance. Zazen appears as the ideal ground for stabilizing this stepping back, once it is stripped of the modern labels that reduce it to a simple technique for well-being or productivity. It is a space of pure settling, where attention becomes stable without forcing its pace. Through this process, focused concentration is cultivated, not through stiffness or internal battle, but in a relaxed manner free from strain. Notice now, in the brief silence opening between these words, how the present instant becomes dense and solid before your eyes. In this exact millisecond, clean clarity emerges, free from the conceptual illusions the mind usually manufactures. Although the path towards this stillness may appear gradual, the decisive rupture with deception arrives suddenly and without warning, defying every attempt to predict it chronologically. You can verify right now that this lucidity does not require any special action. It is already happening. Here, the final answer is revealed to why it is so hard to silence your mind and why you should stop trying. What you wanted to silence was never the real problem. The problem was believing the noise was you. A peaceful consciousness is not one that has defeated the outer murmur through control. It is one that has discovered an untouchable dimension beneath the rumor of thought. That background calm does not enter your head when concepts finally decide to be quiet. It was there from the beginning, waiting with the infinite patience of something that has never hurried because it knows itself imperishable. Your daily efforts cannot manufacture that space of freedom. They only clean the accumulated dirt that kept it hidden. There is no higher state you must reach through sacrifice, only something native in you that you must stop covering with worry. Beneath the noise there is something this video cannot give you, because you already have it. The next time you feel the restless monkey leaping uncontrollably from branch to branch within you, stop the chase and perceive that the tree holding it has always remained in absolute stillness. You are more that tree than the animal inhabiting it. You can verify this in this precise instant when you see that the witness observing movement has never moved. This does not turn life into passivity. It allows action to arise from a quieter root. You still speak, decide, work, love, and face difficulty, but no longer from the panic of a mind trying to control every flame. The fire may appear, the thought may shout, the monkey may jump again, but a deeper recognition remains. You are the open space in which all of it appears and disappears. And once that is known, even for a second, silence is no longer something you seek. It is what you are. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.